Good evening. Welcome to the Pompey Politics Podcast.
I'm Ian Tiny Morris.
And I'm Simon Sainsbury.
Was there just a little half pause there, Simon, while you reflected who you were?
I'm never always sure. It can vary on a day-to-day basis. So sometimes I have to think. So
Well,
those of you... go for it, Ian. Go on. I want to steal your thunder.
No, we have a room full of guests today. Our virtual studio is packed. As party conference season, the Conservatives closed out this week. We've got three folk who were there in the room where it happened, if I might steal shamelessly from Hamilton.
As long as you're not going to start singing, it's fine.
Could happen.
It could. We did have a question when we start putting out the publicity about the show this evening. Asking why we didn't include any other parties, for example, like the Greens. And to be honest, some of that was a bit of practicality. Firstly, their conference isn't until the end of the month, so that would mean kind of delaying the show. And it played with our really well organised schedule. And the other thing is that would make kind of it really difficult and scrappy to have that many people kind of trying to talk at once. So forgive us for not including other voices, but we focused on a voice from each of the three major UK parties. So we've got three esteemed guests for this evening. Some will be familiar to followers of the podcast and some won't. But just to also remind everybody that we are streaming live on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. Please do like, follow, subscribe, and share the hell out of us. We really love it. And if you'd like to put a review wherever you catch up with the podcast, we'd really appreciate that. But if you want to put some money in an envelope, we'd also appreciate that too.
Yeah, we always want fair and balanced, but give us 5 stars.
Indeed.
So let's start with, and we're doing this in the order that the conferences happened. So Paul, welcome. Please introduce yourself and let us know your interest in politics, how you got there, and was this your first time at conference?
Okay, a few things to unpack there. How did I get involved in politics, I guess, is the first bit. I got involved in politics, or I got actively involved in politics in late 2013, early 2014, for the simple reason that I'd always identified myself as a liberally minded individual. And it was, if you cast your minds back, it was just about a time when UKIP were beginning to cause quite a stir. There were, for want of a better way of putting it, dark clouds forming, or certainly from the view of a more progressive, liberally minded internationalist community, there was a threat, a re-emerging threat of nationalism, and I caught myself complaining about it and wondering why I wasn't acting, basically. And 2 years later, we had a referendum. Britain voted to leave the EU, and you know the rest of it, basically. But my involvement started early, sort of 2014, as that was building. Prior to that, I've had a lifetime of just following politics. I guess I studied it many years ago and then sort of drifted out of it during a period when I guess there was more political calm, and then became more engaged again when the waters got somewhat stormier again. So that brings you up to where we are now, I guess, for me.
And I guess viewers might see the top as a clue. I think you are.
I've given you all my reasons and not told you which party at all, as if it wasn't perhaps already obvious. No, I'm a Liberal Democrat. Obviously, always identified as a Liberal, and signed up, as I said to you, when I felt it was time for people with liberal values to actually stand up and be counted.
Marvellous. And was this your first conference? Were you a newbie?
No, this is my first conference was just after Britain had voted to leave the EU in 2016, and I've been there every year since. And perhaps your listeners probably won't know or may not know this, but unlike the other two parties this year, the Liberal Democrats stuck with a virtual conference. So what we are doing here is very much what we were doing at conference, kind of thing.
Marvellous.
More or less well organised, but we won't say which. Okay, so our next guest, who will also be familiar to the podcast, is Craig Withey. So, Craig, do you want to introduce yourself and give us history of how you got into politics?
Yeah, good afternoon. Thanks for having me on again, gents. So yeah, Craig Withy in the red corner this afternoon from the Labour Party. How did I get involved in politics? So I first joined the Labour Party back in 2013 after I left the military, and then had a sort of a brief break for a year or so when I moved abroad, and then moved back and rejoined. So I'm the vice chair of Portsmouth Labour Party, and I was also the candidate for Eastern Cranes Water Award in the elections last year. So that's where some may know me from. Yeah, I think I've always been a sort of a Labour supporter. I mean, I grew up, as you can probably tell, in the northeast, in a working class sort of red wall town, and it's stemmed from there really. I just think I've always had those sort of values from being sort of quite a young age and until now, and yeah, things have sort of taken off a bit in the past few years or so, and yeah, I do quite a lot locally and then nationally as well. I sit on the committee of an organisation called Labour Friends of the Forces, and it's an organisation made up of sort of shadow frontbench MPs and veterans, and we look at sort of veteran support, things around defence policy for the party, and work quite closely with the shadow team. So that's me. Thanks for having me.
Marvelous.
Thank you, Craig.
First conference?
It was this time, yes. Yeah, first one.
Excellent. And a gent who we've wanted to get on the podcast for a while, Robert, can you introduce yourself?
Hi, thanks, guys. So I'm Rob New. I'm councillor for Copnor Ward and was first elected in 2011, so now in my third term. So I'm feeling more like a veteran now. And I got into politics in 2005, and the very sad real reason is that the person who I was dating at the time had also got involved with the party, and I felt like I never saw them. So the only time I get to see them would be to go out campaigning with them on a Saturday morning, and then it snowballed from there and took over my life. So and now, just for the benefit of the viewers, so I am chairman of Portsmouth North Conservatives. I also work for a government minister, and I am the shadow portfolio for green recovery and climate change, whatever that actually entails, which I'm not entirely sure anyone in the council currently knows, but I'm rolling with it at the moment. So because actually I quite like the my opposite numbers, they're good eggs.
Marvelous. And first conference, or maybe a few?
No. I think the alcohol from many conferences over the past 15 years is still in my body.
Super. And to be fair, you're coming off the back of it, so it should all be fresh. So in terms of those listening and watching, we're going to invite each of our three to share their favourite three things from party conference. Could be a policy, could be a direction of travel, or it could be even a secret conversation in the bar after the dead of night. We always love a bit of scandal, and again, we'll kick those things about. So, Paul, how do you fancy kicking us off with the third best thing about Lib Dems?
By all means. Right. I'm going to start on housing because it's a subject which we addressed at our conference and this country has avoided for 40, nearly 50 years now. We've been seeing in this country for, again, the best part of 50 years, supply of housing simply not meeting demand for housing. And what we've ended up doing as a consequence of that is creating this huge divide of the haves and have-nots in societies. If you own property and you've owned property for a long period of time, the value of that is going up considerably greater than inflation. So your wealth is increasing, whilst all the time the increase in your wealth is preventing new people from joining the property ladder. To give you just a simple example, in the first 6 months of this year, house prices increased by 13.2%. Now, unless your salary increased by 13.2% over that same 6 month period, buying a property just became more difficult for you. And we are getting to a point in this country where that lack of supply, scarcity is causing the price to go up, and housing itself, simply to have a roof and four walls around you, is becoming a luxury. So Liberal Democrat Conference, we committed to building 380,000 new homes per year, but ensuring that those 380,000 new homes per year, because often the excuse which is made, or the NIMBYist excuse is made, is a faux environmental one. So 380,000 homes per year, but homes which are environmentally sustainable and carbon neutral. And rather than having the government at the moment, which is what we're seeing, having this top-down approach, which forces solutions on those communities without any say, we believe in actually putting local communities at the heart of that decision-making process. So again, I think this is an area which has been avoided for too long. If we go on ignoring it, we are going to end up in a situation where literally we have people on reasonable middle-class incomes who are homeless. That is the absurdity of the position which we are approaching in this country. So 380,000 new homes per year, carbon neutral, to provide for future generations.
So
I'll leave that there, guys.
no, marvellous. So Craig, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, thanks, gents. Yeah, I mean, obviously housing was discussed massively at our conference too. We did pass a motion on the conference floor, really aimed at housing, and as Paul mentioned there, I mean, there is a massive shortage of housing in this country right now, and I mean we're seeing it locally in Portsmouth as well. The 17,000 new homes that have been sort of put on us by the Conservative government, it's not an achievable target for us to be able to get on the island. We are an island, and there isn't the space for us to be doing it unless we lose green space and go up. Yeah, on the shortage and the rise in house prices, I mean, I'm currently going through the process right now of buying my first house, and the price is astronomical compared to what they were even just a couple of years ago. So it is something that does need to be tackled. Labour, as I said, have passed motions on this as well, to meet sustainable targets, to future-proof the country, which is something that we're not seeing currently from the government. I mean, we've seen ministers grilled on live shows in the past few weeks where they've been brought up on the fact that they've built zero social housing in the past 11 years while they've been in government. So yeah, it's something that Labour are looking at as well, and we will be pushing, especially on the social housing side, to start and get some real targets and to build the homes that the country needs, because right now the housing stock is so low that it's not sustainable for the future.
Interesting dilemma there. So Rob, your thoughts?
Well, I don't actually disagree with some of the points made there, but I think it's a much more complex situation. So Paul touched on actually the crisis has been going on for about 50 years, and I think he's right, pretty much, probably 60s onwards, really. And the inflation, the cost of living prices that are going up, are huge obstacles. However, last year after our conference during the pandemic, there were some brilliant tools that have been launched. One of the ones that I'm hoping to be able to use, which is around the new 5% mortgage, which is going to unlock the ability to have a mortgage for a lot of people. But it's whether people can still save that 5% mortgage, I think, is the concern. With house, no one can escape from the fact that house.
I'm sorry, prices, all you're doing by doing that is releasing more money.
Sorry, can I just finish my point? I didn't speak over you.
It needs to be called out.
Paul, can we just let Rob finish his point, please?
Thank you. So there are some tools that are coming forward. However, the wider problem is to do with the fact that there just aren't enough houses. And just to really make a point in terms of local Portsmouth-based development, so the Lennox Point development, we had a briefing on that the other day, and it wasn't good. And I think it's fair to say across all of the benches there are concerns around what we're seeing. So there's a target built into that development of 3,500 houses, of 30% what they call affordable houses. So when I put the question forward to the officers of, well, what does that mean? Because everything's affordable to someone, what's the social housing breakdown? Are they going to be council houses, a housing association, or just cheaply made houses that people will be able to get a cheap mortgage for? They couldn't tell us, which was disappointing. So I think the problem is complex. we do need to build more houses. There's no getting away from that. But I do think that nobody seemed to have tackled that over the past 40 years successfully. And there's clearly a lot more to do.
Thank you, Rob. Simon.
Okay, thank you. Just thinking ahead to where we, how we kind of move through. If I can just ask people's comments to the policies that each of you mention, to if we can try and kind of limit those responses to a minute and be a response to that, what that other contributor has said. Because obviously you'll be able to speak to the things that the policies that you've got, but I just think that might just kind of help us make sure we get through all of the points. Otherwise, we might scrabble for time at the end. So moving not so swiftly on to so Craig, what was your third most important thing that you would want voters to know about your conference?
Thanks, Simon. Yeah, so I mean, everything that I'm bringing today is quite sort of Labour centric, to be honest. So the first point I want to come on to is really around the party leadership. I mean, this was Keir Starmer's first in-person conference since he was elected as leader in April last year. Obviously, the pandemic has prevented him presenting himself to a wider audience since then. And I think for Keir, what this conference brought was really sort of a show of him consolidating his leadership and showing that he's here to stay and he's the man for the job and he's the one that's going to be pulling us forward. I think what we saw in his speech was him setting out his principles and really communicating to voters and the wider public what he is all about as a person. There was some very sort of personal and moving stories. He touched on some of the legal work that he'd done. There was a family in the audience of a girl that had been murdered, and he worked when he was director of public prosecutions to change the law to benefit those and to bring that person to justice. As well as part of his leadership, obviously he's brought in David Evans as the party's general secretary. His sort of post was ratified by a vote as well with quite a strong majority. So with Keir in his speech, I mean there was a real sort of energy in the room. I know some people say that his speech maybe went on a bit long. But the aim really there was for it to be an hour, but I think there was so much in it and so many sort of long applauses and standing ovations that it did drag out to an hour and a half. So yeah, great conference for Keir. It's really sort of showing that he's in it for the long haul and he's a credible alternative to Boris Johnson.
Okay. Thanks, Craig. So I'll invite Rob now to make any comment on that, please.
Yeah, I have to say, I mean, I like Sir Keir Starmer. So I've had the privilege of spending some time with him, actually. So where Penny is obviously a government minister, and then a previous roles as Secretary of State. And at the time when Jeremy Corbyn was the party leader, they were quite unkind to him. And I went to, I think it was 2018, just before the pandemic struck. And Penny was up for a Politician of the Year award for the Pink News. And I have to say, Diane Abbott and Corbyn, etc., were quite unkind. He was supposed to have been sat on the Labour Party table next to us, and they removed his placard. They were very petty and spiteful. And he came and sat next to us, and he was so nice, and we spoke quite a lot about his past. I felt sorry for him at his first party conference live. I thought that some of the heckling was very distasteful, especially when he was talking about his late mother. I thought he had some good things to say. And, it brings me back to the point where I'm pretty sure that you'll agree with me on this. I still think that when it comes down to it, those of us that are in the centre, there's more that unites us than actually divides us. And, there were some good takeaways. And I have to say, I was obviously taught, I have friends who are Labour councillors, people in the Labour Party, and, was happily tweeting along and messaging with them and saying, are you guys the people I feel sorry for? Because actually, I think you need a strong opposition because it feels a little bit like it's a single nation state at the moment. And whatever people think of Boris, I certainly didn't vote him, but you know, at the moment it kind of feels like he's unchallenged.
Okay. Thank you. And Paul, if I can invite you to make comments on Craig's point.
Yeah. I'll preempt this by saying this isn't the insult it's perhaps going to sound like. I found Keir Starmer at his conference incredibly dull. And when I say that, I say it's not the insult that it immediately sounds like. Corbyn, of course, was very lively, very radical, very good at engaging the far left. That didn't work electorally. Keir Starmer came across as a serious, sensible individual who on this particular occasion may not have left a massive impression with the general public in any which direction, but he did, I think, probably set a bar, if you like, or set expectations where there is a perceived level of competency within the Labour leadership that perhaps wasn't there before this conference. So, and I guess in a way, our own conference with Ed Davey as a relatively new leader wasn't so different in many ways. I think the two-party conferences both had the similarities that they both wanted to cement the idea of a solid, safe pair of hands leading their party. And that's why I say when Keir Starmer came across to me as a bit dull, perhaps that's not how he comes across, or at least the message that he's getting across to people in Middle England actually isn't a particularly negative or dull one. It's giving them a sense of reassurance.
Perfect. Thank you, Paul. So first point then, Rob.
So in terms of from my own conference, I think certainly for myself, and especially because it seems topical and because I think it's actually been a bit of an elephant in the room for quite some time, and that's tackling violence against women and girls. After the recent events with the police officer, Wayne Couzens, attacking and raping and murdering Sarah Everard, I think that shocked the nation. And with all, you know, everyone wants to live on safe streets, etc. And I think for me, what it kind of showed me from listening to the fringe events from people that have experienced attacks themselves, you know, obviously less minor, through to hearing the Home Secretary speak on it, and also people like former Councillor Donna Jones, is the new Police and Crime Commissioner for Hampshire and the Isle of Wight, about actually just how complex some of these situations are and unique for every different community, Portsmouth being no different, and talking about the need to, you know, look at new strategies for neighbourhood policing teams, more CCTV across the city in order to be able to make our streets safer, and other things as well. We all value our community wardens, and it just seems so incredibly complex. But I think the overriding thing for me, which I think is going to be a mountain to climb, is how do you make people feel safe on the streets? And I kind of will expand this a bit beyond women and girls, or violence towards women and girls as well, because off the back of it, I certainly in this past week after coming back from Manchester, I've seen no fewer than 3 different members of the LGBT community, one in London going across the Charing Cross Bridge that was bottled just for holding his partner's hand, with loads of people around, you know, witnessing it, allowed it to happen, sort of thing. Well, perhaps that's a poor choice of words, but you know, you wouldn't expect that in a crowded place. Somebody in Manchester where I was, and very happily, actually, on Tuesday night, I went on a date with someone. It was really nice, and so after the date was ending, I was like, wow, this can go one of 2 ways. I was like, we can either say goodbye now, or you can come into the Viper's Nest of the Conservative Party conference with me. I'll blag you in into the hottest party of the week. And it was kind of nice because I was holding hands, you know, with him walking there. And then literally 2 days later, I read that somebody like 1 road away had been attacked really badly just for doing the same thing. And, you know, that kind of just brought it home to me that in a big city even where, you know, it's well lit, there are a lot of CCTV, that there seems to be a problem, a systemic problem from the ground up with people's behavior and intolerances. And then when you add in the mix, you know, the very serious issues that are going on around women against violence and girls, especially over the past 18 months where people have been locked up. You know, I think a lot of people are very concerned about it, but it's how do we actually tackle it? Because it seems to me, because of the way that government works from the top up, so it's fine for the Home Secretary to sit there and say, we're distressed by that. Nobody would disagree about that, but they're just words. So it's how do we translate that all the way down to the local authority, the constabulary, community safety partners, the refuges, etc. It is, to me, it seems so incredibly complex, but I think it's certainly at the fore of the public's consciousness currently as well.
Massive issue, Rob. So, Paul, your thoughts?
It's difficult to disagree with anything that's actually just been said there. I don't think there's an awful lot that I would immediately want to add. I think
that's okay.
I mean, I think the only thing I will add is that there is we need to be conscious of why this is happening, because we have seen a rise in hate crime in this country over the last few years, and this kind of anti-wokeism culture war whereby diversity itself is effectively attacked. So I absolutely agree with in the sentiment behind everything that Rob said. I would ask us all though to look at the causes and exactly how. And again, I don't direct this to Rob specifically. I don't mean to criticise him in any way, but you know, his party is behind an awful lot of the hate we're seeing currently in society. You know, there has to be some reflection on what the cause of this is, other than us all just simply agreeing that it's a terrible thing.
Okay, Paul. Craig.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I mean, I agree with what Rob's said there. I mean, there's some huge sort of systemic problems within society that's allowing this to go on. And I think all of us have a part to play in tackling this, not just sort of the government and the police. And I think that there's a massive piece of work that we should all be doing in challenging certain behaviours and calling out these things in society. I mean, the Home Secretary has sort of said quite a lot on this, sort of speaking out against sort of the violence against women and girls. And I mean, it wasn't great that the Deputy Prime Minister the other day didn't really know what misogyny was. So it does start at the top down, but I think we have all got a massive part to play. And we should all be picking up and challenging these behaviours.
Brilliant. Thank you, sir. We'll go into round two. If I ask you just to keep it crisp, gentlemen, in the interest of time. Simon, do you want to lead?
Okay, so sorry if I can just click the button. So so then basically this is your second most important thing from your conference. So we're back to Paul, please.
Yeah. Thanks, Simon. Actually, the point Rob was just talking about, this leads into this quite nicely. Now, I appreciate for a lot of people with everything that's going on in the world, this might not seem like the most significant thing to bring up, but actually for people who are affected by this, and that's an awful lot of people, as I'll come on to in a minute, it absolutely is. So, and it's one of those things which I struggle to understand how this even exists still and goes on in 2021. So Liberal Democrats at conference passed a motion to ban conversion therapy. Now, I plead complete ignorance, or certainly a great deal of ignorance prior to this conference and how widespread it was. 1 in 13 LGBT plus people and 1 in 7 transgender people have been either taken part in or have been coerced towards some form of conversion therapy. Now, I hopefully don't have to spell it out to anyone, but this is hugely damaging to anyone psychologically who goes through this. You are effectively trying to gaslight an individual into telling them that what they fundamentally understand with their truest and clearest understanding of themselves is simply not true. And yet, significantly in this country still, religious organizations have been allowed to practice so-called conversion therapy. This government's made a lot of noise about it, but again has done absolutely nothing about it. So whilst I hope there can be general agreement amongst the 3 panelists here that this is deplorable, we absolutely have to take action upon this. So Liberal Democrats have agreed that we ban conversion therapy in all forms without any religious exemptions. We make it illegal to transport people outside of the country in any way or to facilitate people travelling out the country in order for conversion therapy. And we need to bring more public awareness to this, because this is a far bigger, more prevalent problem than the vast majority of people in society recognise. But actually, if you fall into one of these groups of people, actually this is a very, very real danger for you. And if you're in a vulnerable position, the ability to be coerced and to be put in a very, very dangerous, potentially life-threatening position because of what you are being told is very, very real. So again, I'd hope that there would be general agreement amongst the panel, but equally that we would all actually agree that something and more needs to be done.
Thank you, Paul. So to respond to Paul's comment there, Craig.
Yeah, not a huge amount to add on this one. Obviously, conversion therapy, the Labour Party has spoken out against it as well. We passed motions in favour of LGBT plus rights at conference, covering this and covering the rights of trans people as well. I mean, trans rights are human rights, and we should all be supporting and again, like I touched on before, challenging behaviours that really sort of go against these messages.
Okay, thank you. Rob, if you'd like to come in there.
Yeah, I mean, I do agree with most of the points that are raised. It's in the Queen's speech. It has to be delivered within this Parliament, you know. And I have to say, having been at conference, I know that my colleagues within LGBT Conservatives, it's that and also around equality, you know, for transgender people and other people from, you know, intersectional sexualities and whatever, you know, it's much more complex than what's quite often perceived, you know, or shown to us on the news. But we had Carrie Johnson as the key speaker at the LGBT Conservatives Fringe. And it was one of the key themes that she spoke about with regards to banning conversion therapy. Now, she obviously shares bed with the Prime Minister. So I would suspect that being at the very top of government and giving such a clear message on that, I think it will be delivered sooner than what we know. I mean, my thoughts on Liz Truss around this. Yes, I was alarmed when she became Equalities Minister. I'm sure that we probably all have similar views on it. However, I do think that one of the problems in government, doesn't matter whether they're Conservative, Labour, Lib Dem, Coalition, whatever, it doesn't matter. Those people are not experts in those areas. They come in and they're reliant on the civil service to provide them with information and to guide them. And that's a part of the problem in terms of the delays that it takes, because there's so much bureaucracy. And I can say that's somebody that works for a government minister. Now, Penny used to hold that brief, and it took us ages to get the gender recognition consultation out the door, and then to get it back in. I mean, it was a huge exercise, a humongous amount of resource management. They got one of the biggest consultation responses ever back, and then the analysis, etc., is just huge. But I suppose really what it comes down to, though, on top of that, so we know that government, whether it's central, local, moves at a glacial pace. If you say that you're going to do something, people do expect it to be done and enshrined into law. And I would like to see that done sooner rather than later.
Thank you, Rob. So we've got 5 more topics to get through, gents. We are going to have to stay crisp if we're not going to hideously overrun. But want to give everybody a fair suck of the sauce bottle, to use the Australian vernacular. Craig, your second choice.
Yeah, thanks. Again, blowing the Labour horn on this one. So I think that a strong message that's come out of conference for Labour is that Labour is a party that really wants to be taken seriously again. There was a lot around us showing that the party has turned the corner. I mean, we look at the massive defeat that we suffered in the general election in 2019, the worst defeat since the 1930s, and really showing the public that period of soul searching and addressing sort of what went wrong is now over. I mean, we've closed the door on some of the things that have dogged us in the past, anti-Semitism. I mean, we've seen at conference actively passing rule changes to bring into practice the EHRC report into anti-Semitism within the party. It's finished. We've moved on. We've closed the door on these things, and we showing the public now that the party can be trusted and be an alternative to the Conservatives. We're not a party that sort of has the backroom deals. It's all about transparency, and we're working hard and doing all that we can, and it's coming to win back the voters that deserted us in 2019. And I mean, Keir has sort of been up and down the country finding out what those issues were, and we're addressing them, and we're moving on.
Perfect. Thank you, Craig. Rob, any comment on that?
Good luck.
Okay, that's brief.
I'll take that as concise. That's lovely work. And so across to Paul.
Yeah, I think I'll probably give you a bit of time back as well. The only thing, I mean, good luck. The only thing I was going to comment on is I'm not sure you can categorically say that you've put anti-Semitism to bed in the Labour Party, for the simple reason that I'm not sure you can categorically say that will ever remove every hard left Rothschild conspiracy theorist from the planet, basically. So that element is always going to linger on in the Labour Party. I think it's a question of how much influence it has, and certainly I'm encouraged by what I've seen from the Labour Party, and from a number of people I know in the Labour Party that have told me that things appear in that regard to be moving in the right direction. But I'm not sure that it's dead or that it ever will be completely dead in Labour.
Perfect. Thank you, Paul. Simon.
Okay, so now we move to Robert's second most favourite thing from the Conservative Party conference.
So this is a bit of a broad thing, but it's kind of like all things environment. So I think we are definitely the party that owns the environmental ground, in terms of we are definitely the greenest government there's ever been, and certainly seems to me that the Prime Minister is certainly behind it. In fact, I think I saw him speaking more about the environment, net zero, along with his father, than anything else. Like, you turn around and the Prime Minister was there wherever you went. It was kind of like he had his own little network of secret doors going on, like the Red Keep in Game of Thrones. And so, but on a serious note, it's very heartening, because I have a lot of colleagues across the country who I see at conference face to face, who are part of things like the Conservative Environment Network, various organisations that do a huge amount of volunteering, as I'm sure every party actually has. But you know, they're actually helping to shape policy that's coming forward around environmental conservation. And a specialist interest area for myself is marine conservation. So as a keen surfer, somebody that loves the beach and running away to the ocean when things are stressful, I was very aware that there were lots of policies coming forward, especially around things like low-tech solutions to deal with cleaning up coastal community waters, etc. But I kind of offset this with, unless you can get a crack and get hold of these troublesome local water companies around the country, because clearly fines don't seem to be working. It's all well and good having the most amazing policies in the world, but it's not going to count for anything if your shellfish beds are still being contaminated with E. coli, which is then closing down fisheries. It's going to put a block on having sustainable harbours, fisheries, etc., marine life. None of it goes hand in hand. And again, it kind of comes back to my point of, there does seem to be good policies around this, but unless everything is all synced up and works together, and that goes right the way through to the local authority, we're never going to achieve where we want to go to. And I think we probably all agree on where we actually want to be with the carbon neutral net zero stuff. We want to have thriving environments, we want to have great oceans, etc. We really want to roll stuff back. But we're never going to get there unless we can take charge of some of these bigger things. And I don't know whether that includes, I'm not really a fan of nationalisation, but I do appreciate that in some cases, such as perhaps water, that may be the only viable solution on things like that. So yeah, the environment, education around the environment, huge jobs in the environment sector, and looking to be innovative. It certainly was a theme for us. And also as well, some exciting innovation as well. So one of the things that's always struck me as strange, and it was great to finally hear people talking about at this conference, is we obviously have the Atlantic with great swell, especially at this time of year. Why we are not harnessing tidal wave electricity generation, etc. You know, I hate the fact that we're relying on things like interconnectors. I've always thought they were bad. You know, ever since I saw things like, I know it's not an interconnector, but where we saw maybe 15 years ago, Russia threatening to shut off the energy to the Ukraine, which they then duly did, or gas. You know, and with recent events with the French making threats to Jersey and the Channel Islanders, you know, it doesn't sit well with me. And then obviously the Aquin situation, you know, it's not good. But the environment, all things environment, was kind of at the core of everything at our conference. And I have to say, the Prime Minister was the biggest champion of that, along with his father.
Thank you, Rob. Just to remind listeners that on the 24th of October, we're welcoming Let's Stop Aquin back onto the show to talk to us about the pending decision by Kwasi Kwarteng about whether the Aquin interconnector will go ahead or not. So there'll either be a celebration or a what's next for your campaign conversation. So do make sure not to miss that one. Paul, your responses to Paul's second most important thing from conference?
Yeah, I'm not sure where to start. The most environmentally friendly government in history.
Fact.
Sorry?
Fact.
Okay, we're literally sat on the south coast at the moment, and we are surrounded by sewerage. There is a major warning on the south coast at the moment because of pollutants which your government is allowing companies to pump into the sea, and has actively told companies that they can reduce their levels and pump more pollutants into rivers and the sea in this country. Aquin has just been mentioned by Simon. The stench of government corruption around that, I think many people in this area are familiar with. If anyone has bothered to look at the Paradise Papers, you will be familiar with the links there. To claim that this government, I mean, Boris Johnson's dad, you made reference to, who campaigned vigorously to remain in the European Union on environmental grounds against his son. I don't know what else I need or can really add to that. This is a government which doesn't care about the environment, has been in power for 11 years, and the idea that you're coming up with some ideas now to save the planet, which you are literally busy telling companies they are welcome to pollute more than you've ever allowed them to in the past, is beyond disingenuous. Thank you.
Sorry, if I can just come back in there,
Please do.
Yeah, that's absolutely not the case. We're here to talk about what was announced at our conferences, and I'm just saying to you that at the core of much of what was said, the environment was a central theme, which is true. I was there. I listened to it. Now I take.
Pollutants into rivers and seas.
I don't disagree with you on that. I mentioned that even to the point where I said that they're problematic, and that needs to be got hold of. In fact, organisations like Surfers Against Sewage are actually launching campaigns, which I've been a part of, which I've been happy to support. No, I don't think it's disingenuous. I just think the government is more complex, and if your party ever was able to get back into being a private government, which it's never going to do without someone like the Conservatives, you know, you would actually probably understand this, and you obviously got involved after the coalition.
I don't understand this as well as you do.
Yes,
gentlemen, I think you've both made your points.
I don't agree with Craig.
I need to bring Craig into it so that he can make his comments.
We're literally allowing our rivers and seas to be polluted, and Rob won't admit that.
And it's wrong.
The Prime Minister.
Paul, you've made that point. Rob, you've rebutted that.
You can't acknowledge that is disingenuous, and that those are the words of fraudster. They're right there.
Paul, thank you. I need to bring in Craig because we are really otherwise we're going to struggle to get everything in. Craig, if you can, if you'd like to comment on Rob's second most important thing from conference, please.
Yeah, I'm just going to go on and really talk about what came out of the Labour conference on climate change. I mean, climate change is obviously one of the biggest. Well, call it a pandemic or issue that we've ever faced, and to really sort of bring us back from the brink, Labour have put together what's called the Green New Deal. It's been something that's been sort of championed and spoken about for quite a while within the party. We've built on it yet again this year at conference, and it's about sustainability. I mean, we've got to move away from the use of fossil fuels. We need to be investing more in green jobs and green energy, and bringing, really leading the way from the front. Really, I mean, Britain. A lot of people talk about sort of China and other countries that are sort of high level polluters, but Britain really needs to be leading from the front on this and being a shining example to the world, really, of what we can do to as I said, bring us back from the brink. We passed the 2 motions on the Green New Deal. All they were both quite similar, really, all centered around sustainability and heavily greening up all of our industries. So yeah, I agree that it's a massive challenge. There are issues locally as well as nationally, but Labour is working hard to bring us to be the pinnacle in the world, really, in the fight against climate change. So I'll keep that brief there. Thanks.
Thank you, Craig. As we get into our final 3, we really are now very tight for time. So if we can just keep ourselves nice and crisp. So we will start the lead off. Paul, your favourite thing from the Lib Dem conference?
Okay, part of a vast policy. So I've just skimmed it down to one little bit, which I've broadly called Liberty, which within it had 4 subsections, if you like. But this was a beacon for individual rights, diversity and inclusion, and addressed 4 key areas. And I guess I wanted to bring this to everyone's attention because it is key and fundamentally liberal. So point 1 was about addressing misogyny, which obviously in our current society, as we're all aware, and we're all familiar with the Sarah Everard case, violence against women and girls continues, of course, until to this day. And Liberal Democrats really want to address that. We really want to address that fundamentally through education as well. It's important that we are talking to young boys, to young men, to introducing age-appropriate sex education, so that a lot of the misogynistic behaviour which we see in society is simply not repeating itself generation after generation. We wanted to tackle racism as well. Now, I'm stating the obvious by saying that we want to tackle racism. Everyone wants to tackle racism. I'm sure there would be broad agreement here, but we need to stop the disproportionate use of stop and search. And we have to abolish the Conservatives' hostile environment bill, which thirdly, freedom of expression. Now, this is terrifying. This should be terrifying to anyone, regardless of political party. The defense of the Human Rights Act and the cracking down on protest by Priti Patel is genuinely a terrifying assault on liberty itself. And as I say, that isn't a party political point, or it shouldn't be a party political point. The right to protest, the right to freedom, the right to expression, the right to fundamental human rights, which were initially created by Churchill's government post-war, are under attack now by the British government in this country. That cannot be allowed to go unchecked. That needs to be addressed. And then finally, homophobia. And I mentioned before, obviously, about banning conversion therapy, but it goes far, far further than that. Again, in our country, and I referenced this earlier, there has been a rise in hate crime across the board. There's been a rise in hate crime since 2016, specifically, at the time of the referendum, when an awful lot of people felt emboldened in their views on hate, and they felt they had been given a platform to facilitate that by politicians. And so our address has to be, again, to focus and double our efforts, focusing on all forms of prejudice, homophobia included. I think I'll leave it there because I could go on about these points and say it was a vast policy, but I'll give the time back, guys.
Thank you, Paul. I think you've been very clear and articulate on the key points there, and I won't expect you to get too much pushback on that. Craig?
Yeah, again, I mean, I know Rob already touched on these points around violence against women and girls, the sort of LGBT side of stuff as well. Yeah, not really much to come back on that. I think it's all sort of a quite shared values that I'd want anyone to have. So yeah,
that's brilliant. Thank you, Craig. And Rob?
Yeah, pretty much the same as I said earlier on. There's more that unites us than divides us.
No, and that's great, and it's lovely as we cover these things that neither of you seen the list of each other before we got into this, so it's always fascinating to me that we've got several topics there where we've overlapped. Simon.
Okay, so thank you very much. Let's move on without further ado to Craig's most important, so his priority thing that he'd want voters to know from the Labour Party conference, please.
Thanks. Yeah. Again, on the Labour side for this, so I just really want to go into the key 4 points and messages that have come out of Labour Party conference, and those being work, care, equality, and security, and that's sort of the big line that Labour are pushing now. I mean, I think those 4 values, if you will, are sort of core British values. Everybody in our society can get behind. I mean, the sort of fairness. I touched already on the green jobs for work under the Labour Green New Deal. Care. I mean, we've seen in a lot in the press recently. I mean, Labour want to bring in a care system that works, that is fully funded. I mean, the disaster that sort of the Conservatives have made with the hike in national insurance is completely the wrong way to go about. I think we need to do something, but the way that it's being handled is not the way that we go, and Labour wouldn't be pressing on with that agenda. Equality. I mean, we've touched here on violence against women and girls. We touched on LGBT plus rights, and I think equality as well is making sure that everybody, no matter what level of society you're at, is paying their fair share to fund the country. I mean, we look at sort of big corporations that are dogged with offshore tax, billionaires that are sending themselves to the moon rather than helping us fix the broken parts of our society. So Labour again want to bring that back and use that to equal up. I mean, the Tories talk about levelling up. We want to equal up as one of our main priorities, and security as well. I mean, one of the first priorities of any government should be keeping its citizens safe. I mean, obviously, I'm an ex armed forces member. I'm a veteran. I served in Afghanistan and Iraq, and I mean, bringing our armed forces and our veterans to the forefront of what we do, keeping the country safe, and from threats both abroad and here at home. I mean, these 4 things, they're not really just sort of sound bites from a stand-up kind of routine that we sort of come out of Conservative conference. These are sort of clear and concise building blocks for what Labour want the country to look like, and with a Labour government, this is what we're going to go for, and this is what people will get.
Okay, thank you, Craig. Rob, I'll invite you first to make your comments on Craig's most important thing from conference.
Yeah, I mean, like, again, sorry to say it, but there's more that unites us on these things in the centre ground than divides us. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Nice and brief. Paul.
Yeah, I'm gonna we disagreed about a few things. I'm going to echo everything Rob just said there. Basically, I think genuinely there's I take your point, whether they're slogans, whatever you want to call them. I think there's a lot there. I suppose as well there's a point there that probably sits a lot more softly with people now that Corbyn has gone. I immediately see sort of social democratic liberal crossovers there, where again there is more that unites us than divides us. So I think this country genuinely needs a strong Labour Party, and I genuinely wish you all the best in that regard with that.
Okay, thank you.
Marvellous. Leads us into our final offering. So Rob, the floor is yours. What was best about the Conservative Party conference?
Well, as I'm sure it's the same with all the other party conferences, actually the main speeches by the senior politicians are a real snooze fest, and actually the quality is in the fringe from real professionals, people that work in industry, etc. And for me, it was around mental health. So it's something I'm a big advocate for, and obviously today is World Mental Health Day. There were lots of good takeaways, lots of compassion, lots of emotional intelligence. And one of the things that's always irked me since getting kind of like, I suppose, neck deep into the world of mental health services, procurement, commissioning, etc., is just how terrible it is and how it fails people at every level, vulnerable people, their families, etc. And very sadly, that too often results in suicide. So it was great that after years of having various awarenesses or people talking platitudes on it, to hear ministers, I suppose, really getting a taste of people that have been on the front line within a conservative environment. And when I look at Portsmouth specifically, we need an intervention on this. So it spoke to me on that level, because I often feel like I'm one of those lone people that are obsessed with an issue, like banging a drum, and eventually, you know what it's like. You feel very isolated. But it's a serious topic, and I certainly think over the past 18 months, where we haven't been able to meet in person in terms of going to party conferences, this was the first time when we were able to do so, and seeing people face to face and being able to look them in the eye when you're talking about the very serious issues related to mental health, people that have been severely affected, loneliness, isolation, and all of the other problems, addiction, homelessness, etc., which leads to very complex mental health situations, were being discussed in great detail about what the blockages within various authorities are, blockages with national government, etc. And there actually seemed to be people that were listening for the first time on something that I perceive to be very serious now, as I'm sure colleagues will know here. So before the pandemic, we had something for young people waiting to go in, even be seen before they could be referred even into treatment services. It was around 16 weeks. And I know that Councillor Susie Horton shares my concerns and has been doing everything she can do. But I know that obviously under the pandemic, that's just gone balls to the wall. It's way, way, way worse now. And for anyone to pretend that it's not, we've got to have upfront and frank discussions about this. But getting the referral was just the first step and the first hurdle. The actual treatment services, especially for more severe problems and for people that are being sectioned, for example, at the Orchards, it's woeful. It is appalling. They're not fit for purpose, and it's incredibly complex as well. So I liken it to, it feels like you're banging against the door of a fortress with a great huge iron drawbridge. And then when you can finally get inside, it's in a conveyor belt. It just seems that there needs to be a huge intervention. And so for me, so apologies that this is actually quite a bit of a downer, but I think after coming out of the pandemic, so many people are going to need these services right away across the age spectrum as well, across all different backgrounds and across all benches as well. And I think it's positive that we're now having frank discussions about it. But honest to God, I think that's its own pandemic in itself. And, and I think it's something that we need to do better, and we will have to work together in order to tackle this.
Thank you, Rob. No, very appropriate on World Mental Health Day. So, Paul, just final thoughts on that?
Yeah, there's an awful lot there that I absolutely agreed entirely with. The sentiment behind it. Can't disagree with it in the slightest, so I will keep it fairly brief. The only thing that, and I mean this absolutely sincerely, I'm genuinely pleased to hear that the Conservative Party conference, Rob came away feeling that genuinely people were actually being listened to and taken seriously. I find it incredible that that's new in 2021 in the Conservative Party, though, where certainly in many, many areas of society, that wasn't new. That wouldn't have been a new conversation at most People's Party's conferences in 2021. But again,
sorry. That, just for clarification, that's not what I meant. I meant as in the fringe events. It was actually very high level, very focused. And let's be honest, government ministers are like on a carousel. They don't stay in the jobs long enough to force through meaningful policy. And all of the committees that do the evidence, they just take far too long. They work at a glacial pace. So the party has recognised it, but we had some laser focused, frank, harsh discussions this year, and it was very welcome.
Okay. Thanks for that. It obviously needs funding, and funding for mental health has been cut significantly. Norman Lamb, obviously within the Liberal Democrats for years and years and years, has very much been the spokesperson and the person to listen to in UK politics about this. I hope the Tory party will take forward some of his work. Certainly they were less than impressed and scoffed a lot in coalition. I hope their attitude has changed now. Certainly what Rob's saying to me gives me some reason for for optimism.
Thank you, Paul. Craig.
Yeah, I mean, to quote our MP Stephen Morgan, I know he's said this quite a lot, but the next pandemic that we're going to face is going to be a mental health pandemic. There's no two ways around it. I mean, Keir Starmer touched on this quite heavily in his speech at conference, pledging that for mental health service, people would be referred to a specialist practitioner within a month, because right now the waiting times. I was listening to a show on LBC just the other day, and people were calling in saying that they've waited sort of 3 or 4 months to be seen. So we need to invest and bring that down. I touched on earlier the organisation that I'm part of, Labour Friends of the Forces. We had quite a successful our own fringe event at Labour conference. I was on the panel there taking questions. And one of the things that we did touch on quite heavily was veterans' mental health. It kind of it does get sidelined from some sort of mainstream services quite often. So yeah, it's really an area that we should be doing much more in. So thanks.
Thank you. And so, gentlemen, thank you all for your contributions this evening. I think, anybody who's been listening along has, I think the mantra that there is more that unites us than divides us has come through, as there's been so much overlap in those areas. And thank you all for sharing your views of conference, and wishing you all the best. You've been listening to the Pompey Politics Podcast. I've been Ian Tiny Morris.
And our guest for the Liberal Democrats has been
Paul Gray.
And for the Labour Party,
Craig Withy.
And for the Conservatives,
Councillor Robert New. Thank you.
And thank you. And I've been Simon Salisbury. Please join us next week, where we'll be looking into staff and stock shortages. If you'd like to take part in that show or have any comment on it, please contact us on Facebook or email us. But thank you for watching.